It's time to find out
What Shane
said with Shane Manila.
Hey, what's up, world? It's time for another Shane Says. It's been a couple weeks. That's about the cadence, every 2 weeks or so. This is going to be a fun episode for the haters, for the folks that don't like me, or even the people that like me, but just disagree with some of my takes. I'm going to admit to being wrong, which is important in fantasy football, right? I talk about this a lot. I make a shit ton of mistakes. I get things wrong all the time. I'm not psychic. Psychic? Yeah, I think that's the correct word. I don't have a psychic ability, right? I can't see the future. I'm just guesstimating based off facts, figures, gut feeling, etc. To that point, I believe it's Sigmund Bloom. I've heard him say before about fantasy football. The game itself is more of an art than a science. Sometimes you have to accept that even with all the data that you have, you're not always going to get some things correct because there's other parameters, right? Ray talks about this all the time. We're playing a game based off of real players playing. There is room for variance. I don't want to say luck because fantasy football analysts, content creators, whatever we call ourselves now, we don't like to mention the word luck. Luck is a thing. We prefer to call it variance because it sounds fancier. I think that's why. But anyway, let me get back to the point. I made mistakes, multiple mistakes on players, trades, etc. But players we're going to stick to today. I've made mistakes. It's okay to admit that you're wrong. And in fact, you should admit that you're wrong. You should be looking for mistakes. You should be looking for where you failed because that's how you get better, right? That's how you realize, or that's where you make improvements. It's easy to look back at something and go, hopefully you can look back at something and go, this is where my thought process was. And this is why I didn't like this player. This is why I was wrong. So from that part, I guess it would be more of a science, right? You have an hypothesis. And it's been a while since I had sixth grade math, but right, like you had a hypothesis, which is basically an educated guess, but it's based on data and existing factors and some other stuff. I forget. It's been a while since I had to do that little poster board presentation thing in sixth grade science. But anyway, it's a hypothesis. So either way, let's get to the point. I'm talking today about players that I was wrong about. And, just in general, as you can already tell, this episode is going to be a little more philosophical, a philosophical approach as opposed to hard numbers, a lot of data, a lot of stats. That's how I like to play fantasy football. I like using my brain and I like trying to diagnose why things are. I love psychology of fantasy football. Anyway, so this is going to be more of a soft episode as opposed to like hard numbers and stuff. And it's going to be a quick one. First off, and remember, this can cut both ways. You could be talking about players that you liked that you were wrong about, or you could be talking about players you dislike that you were wrong about. First player that I'm going to hit on is a player that I absolutely love. If you have watched Dynasty Trades in 5 in the past, I don't know, however many years we've been on the YouTubes there, 3 years or so, I love Chris Olave. Absolutely love him. If you saw Shane Sen's video prior to the season, I was hyping up Chris Olave. Follow me on Blue Sky at Shane is not that bad, as opposed to on Twitter where I'm at Shane is not the worst. Shane is the worst. Shane is the worst on Twitter. On Blue Sky, Shane's not that bad. Well, dichotomy there. Anywho, I'm a big Chris Olave guy, right? Put out a video before the season telling you why I loved him. I talked myself into what I thought he was going to become. I did that, based partly on the fact that he had a new offensive coordinator in New Orleans, narrative street telling me that he was going to be used like their Tyreek Hill there. Obviously, there's only one Tyreek Hill, but he was going to run Tyreek Hill type routes. He was going to be like that offense's Tyreek Hill, which is, if you're wearing sweatpants, you can't get up for the moment when you hear that. That's where I was with Olave. But we have to take new facts into consideration. And irregardless or ignoring the concussions that Chris Olave suffered this year, and, that will always color the conversations about Chris Olave and his value going forward. But regardless of his value, more from a production standpoint. Chris Olave scored 12.6 points per game this year. 12.6 points per game in games in which he played at least 75% of the offensive snaps. Obviously, I'm taking out the games that he was concussed in. He didn't play 75% of the snaps. He played something like 10, 2, and I forget the other one, but it was well below 75%. So I didn't want to count those games. But just those games, 12.6 points per game. That would make him, over a full season, wide receiver 41. So I would like to think that even without the concussions, I would have come to the conclusion, the determination that Chris Olave is just not going to be the guy that I had hoped that he was, right? Chris Olave, what I hoped he would be, was a wide receiver 1. I think that's out the window. Quite frankly, wide receiver 2 might be in play. But even then, you know how I feel about that, right? You can find wide receiver 2s. Generally, I'm looking for elite fantasy producers. Anyway, Chris Olave would have been the wide receiver 41 this year. You take into account that his best season was last year, 2023, when he was the wide receiver 19. 2, 3. That's 2 seasons in his career where he's been a wide receiver 2 or worse. He was wide receiver 25 as a rookie. So he's actually been a wide receiver 2, a wide receiver 3, and then the wide receiver 41 this year. Let's see, 12, 24, 48. And then that make him a wide receiver 4 this year. So it's going the wrong way. I would like to think that that's a player that, I'd come to this conclusion and go, it's time to move on from him. So Chris Olave, loved you, dude, but it's time to move on from you. I got new information. I got to move on. And just speaking about loving players, right? Really, I like to think of myself as player agnostic, even though I do fall into the traps of falling in love with players generally for a short period. Kind of like my dating life. That's another story. But, I do fall in love with players, but it's usually for a very short window. In general, you probably should be player agnostic. You should really be looking at stats and things like that, obviously, right? Names shouldn't matter to you. Names shouldn't be an overriding factor when it comes to how you feel about a player. Now, I play in a lot of leagues. I play in something like 30 leagues. And there's a couple schools of thought when you play in portfolios. Portfolio, if you play in a lot of leagues, it's called a portfolio. I can't think of the word I wanted to add there. But if you play in a lot of leagues, it's a portfolio. I play in 30 leagues. Some people think you should be more exploitative on players that you like. And I hope that I said that word correctly. Some people believe that basically you should get as many players as you can on your team. So, for example, let's say Chris Olave going into the season, I think I had something like a 15% rostership. Some people are under the belief that if you really like Chris Olave, go full bore, get as much of him as you can. You get over 20%, keep going. 30%, keep going. 40%, keep going. 50%, keep going. You get my point. In general, I think that should be limited to the elite of the elite players. Really, if I have 50% of Josh Allen, Jamar Chase, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, those are the players that you want to be exploitative on. Probably not wide receiver 2s because they are easily replaceable, and those are players that you can buy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, getting back. Chris Olave, I was wrong. Loved you. But unfortunately, he's not what I thought he was going to be. Now I want to go to the other way. Player I hated. Hate is a strong word. I don't put hate out there. It's a terrible thing to put into the universe. But a player I wasn't a big fan of, and it's a player that I told you to sell. He's a player that I told you wasn't going to produce. I've been given other information to prove otherwise. But can you guess who that player is? Like, it's 9:19, I think, right now. Go in the comments. Put the player you think that I'm speaking of. I'll give you 2 seconds to do that. Okay, 2 seconds. I think a lot of you know this. It's JSN, Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Now, I do want to preface this by saying I did not just pull it out of my ass as to why I did not like Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Generally, I don't do that with players. The next player we'll get to, I kind of did. For no reason, not liking him, really. This Jaxon Smith-Njigba kind of gave me a reason not to like him, right? As a rookie, he scored 8.8 fantasy points per game. And if you remember, prior to the season, what I did is I went ahead and looked at all the rookie wide receivers that scored 8 points per game, 8 points per game, 8 to 9.3 points per game as a rookie, from the 2015 through 2022 seasons. It was 8 years. And what that gave me, there was 19 receivers altogether that found that range. There was multiple first rounders, multiple second rounders, some third rounder, one third rounder, a few fourth rounders, but there were some high end wide receivers in there. So just so you know, the sample size was, it made sense to apply it to Jaxon Smith-Njigba. So anyway, I went through that, and what I found out of a total of 53 seasons played among those players at that time, there had been a total of 2 wide receiver 1 seasons and 2 wide receiver 2 seasons. So 4 seasons out of 53, which is something like 7.69% exactly, had gone on to give you a wide receiver 1 or 2 season after what Jaxon Smith-Njigba did as a rookie in that range, 8.8 to 9.3 points per game. So anyway, I had a reason as to why I didn't like him. Now, what's happened this year is Jaxon Smith-Njigba has proved me wrong. And just right off the bat, because I am a hater, it's in my blood. I got to put this out there. There's some stats of his that worry me a little bit. So among wide receivers with at least 100 routes, he is 31st in target share. He's 36 in air yards, team percentage of air yards. He is 47th in targets per route run, and his 6.2 Trinity score. His 6.2 Trinity score suggests that he's more of a wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1. So not technically a needle mover. And he has a player on his team, a teammate, that's what you call them, not a co-player, a teammate, DK Metcalf, whose Trinity score is 7.17, which is closer to a high-end wide receiver 1. Obviously, it's more, not better than JSN's. But bringing it back the other way, I got to put respect on JSN, right? And part of it is DK Metcalf kind of is what he is. I went back and looked at his last couple seasons. I looked at his 21 and 2022 seasons to look at his Trinity score and then see what he did. And why we're doing that is Trinity score is predictive of the next year. So in 2021, DK Metcalf had a 7.5 Trinity score. He ended the 2022 season as the wide receiver 24. 2022, 7.0 Trinity score. Again, wide receiver 1 range. He ended the 2023 season as the wide receiver 22. Last year, his Trinity score, high. This year, again, he's not going to be smashing. He's kind of what he is. Not a bad player. I think he's just a wide receiver 2. So that kind of lessens my concern about JSN being able to be the alpha on his roster. And I know that his profile doesn't scream alpha, but we've seen that type of receiver smash before. So again, concern is a little lessened there. I got to give him his props. The kid is wide receiver 16 for the year, right? 15.3 points per game. Now, and even though his target share is low, he's 9th in targets. So even if his target share isn't elite, his raw targets are. He's valued highly, right? He's a wide receiver 13 on KTC. And then just to be fair, I went back and I ran another thing from StatHead, great site. What I did is I went through again, using the same years, 2015 to 2022, and pulled every second year wide receiver that scored between 14.5 and 15.8 fantasy points in their second season, where JSN falls. The names on that list: T. Higgins, DJ Moore, Jalen Waddle, Michael Gallup, Calvin Ridley, DJ Chark, Devonta Smith, Terry McLaurin, Steph Diggs, Deontay Johnson, CD Lamb. So I ran out of fingers, but at one point, I think I was up to like 13 either pretty good to really, really good wide receivers that have given you heard the name. CeeDee Lamb has given you multiple wide receiver one seasons. T. Higgins has had the season he's been smashing. He's had seasons where he's been really good. DJ Moore's last year, excellent. Jalen Waddle was great as a rookie. Obviously, since the second year, not as great. But, the point being, that list is a lot better than the list I pulled that JSN comped to at the beginning of the season. So guess what? JSN's a guy I like now. That's simple. Admit you were wrong based on new information. React accordingly. JSN is a buy to me. I went on Dynasty Daddy, checked out some trades that you could get JSN for that I thought were pretty fair. This one just so happens to be right up what I was talking about. Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Someone was able to get him for Chris Olave and a 2025 fourth round pick. That's a steal. I'll tell you right now, I would add multiple seconds to Chris Olave to get to Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Another deal that I liked from the JSN side. Someone got JSN. All they had to give up was Amari Cooper, Hunter Henry, and David Montgomery. And it's not a start 15. It's a 12-team start 10. You got Jaxon Smith-Njigba, a young emerging wide receiver 2 right now, but he could move into that wide receiver 1 range for an elderly Amari Cooper, Double H. I like him just fine. David Montgomery is running back. I'm always going to fear running backs. Another deal. This deal is even much, much better than either of the other 2 I mentioned. But someone was able to get Jaxon Smith-Njigba giving up Brandon Ayuk, Brenton Strange, and Braylon Allen. And this is in the last week, just so you know. This was actually 3 days ago. That's insane to me. So, yeah, I guess I'm a Jaxon Smith-Njigba guy now. It's weird, but look, again, adjust accordingly to the facts that you are presented. Do not hold on to things just because you want to prove that you were right and then just hope things go wrong and then you will be proven right later. You're proven wrong, act on it. Next player. This was more squishy. It's more squishy. This wasn't heavy on data. I absolutely hate it. Bo Nix. I believe I might have called him a trash stick, a gutter bag, some other untoward names that weren't cool. Guess what? Bo Nix, making me eat those words. Part of the reason I didn't like Bo Nix, there was some analytical basis behind it. Very low ADOT in college. He was 75 years old. Had 15 years starting in college. Should have 7 doctorates, I think, based on the time he was in college, but whatever. Anywho, he was comped to guys like Chris Wenke, Brandon Whedon. Those were 2 of the quarterbacks drafted in the first round that were old, like like Bo Nix. There was a few other players. I'm sure people saw that tweet. Either way, the point being, though, that was a small statistical sample. There you go. Got the word out eventually. It was a small sample size. Should have just went with that to begin with. Easier to say. It was a small sample size, but I ran with it because it fit my narrative. I already didn't like Bo Nix. And then I had a very small sample size, just backing up what I wanted to believe. So I bought it. I dug in my heels before the draft. I dug in my heels after the draft when Bo Nix went, 12 overall? Rookie drafts. I could have had Bo Nix, and many of you could, right? We could have had Bo Nix anywhere from, let's be reasonable, 109 to 202. And many of us, me included, I'll take the L, I'll admit it, drafted Xavier Worthy. I don't even remember some of the other players we drafted over him. It doesn't matter. We should have probably taken Bo Nix. He's a quarterback. He was drafted 12th overall. If you listen to scouts talk about him, they told you what he could do despite his limitations. But again, I had it in my head what I wanted to believe. So all I heard was the limitations. Didn't bother with what he could be. And what's really odd about that for me is I just dug in that I hated the kid. He's the type of quarterback I like. He's a mobile quarterback. I love me some mobile quarterbacks. Those are my dudes. Those are the dudes I want on my roster. Had a chance to get one at the 110, and I was like, nah, because he was old. I had it in my head why I disliked him. I ignored absolutely every positive indicator for this kid. And right now he is the QB 10 in points per game. And he has been a QB1 in 6 of 13 games. He's improved leaps and bounds over the beginning of the season. And the beginning of the season, too, I was looking super smart. He looked terrible. So much so that I was ignoring when his stats were improving, when his game was improving. I was ignoring people telling me that he was good. It's not important to be first right? It's awesome if you are right before everyone else. Almost important is accepting that you're wrong and then rectifying that matter. It took me 3 months into the season, 4 months into the season to recognize that I was wrong on Bo Nix. It took me 3 months into the season to recognize that I'm wrong on JSN, excuse me. Being wrong is okay. Holding on to your wrong ideas just because those were your initial takes is a stupid effing idea. Do not do that. And that's the point of this show. So who were some of the players that you were wrong on, good or bad? Who are guys that you really liked? And you need to now admit that you're wrong. And here's the thing. Look at the players you really liked. Don't make excuses for them. There are reasons and then there are excuses. Legitimate reasons, okay. I probably should have looked at JSN and said, you know what? It's probably a legitimate reason that DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett were healthy and their OC was Sean Waldron. But I digress. Who are the players you were wrong on? Either way. Players that you thought were going to be really good that didn't turn out to be good. Really bad that ended up proving you wrong. Let me know. I'd appreciate it. Hey, and if you've stuck around this entire time, I appreciate that. 2, hit that like. If you haven't subscribed for some reason, hit subscribe. If you are not part of the DD fantasy community, hit me up. I have a promo code. We'll get you a discount on that first month for either the GOAT tier or the All Access and Discord tier. Check us out for a month. Give us a month. I promise you, you will love it. It is the best fantasy community. Discord community, always popping. Our secret, they're not really secret, but our premium podcast that only go to our
A few moments later.
subscribers. Those folks banging. We got about a show a day just for those folks. So anyway, I appreciate you. Let me know what you think. What players were you wrong on? And if you just wanted to tell me what players you were right on, or if you just wanted to tell me I'm a doofus for hating Bo Nix and JSN and that you always loved them, cool. Tell me that too. Talk to you later.